Mental health is a fundamental part of a person's overall well-being and includes their social, psychological, and emotional well-being. Universally, people's mental health has been on the decline due to the more stressful lives that we are experiencing. A survey has reported that approximately 18.3% of South Africans are suffering or being treated from depression at any given time. However, although some data and information is available on these mental illnesses, in countries that are low or medium income, such as South Africa, these statistics often remain underreported and the mental illnesses are often undiagnosed or underdiagnosed. However, mental illness does not only affect a person in their private capacity, but often boils over into their workplace environments and productivity. And this will be the focus of today's speech. We see that the United Nations, as well as other organizations such as WHO and the International Labour Organization, have done studies and seen that mental health disorders, and in particular depression, are becoming very big health concerns on a global scale. South Africa is no exception to this, with SADC reporting that 1 in 4 employees suffer from depression. Further from these statistics, mental illness cases and matters are rising in the courts, and we've seen that this has become an everyday issue in many businesses. So exactly what can we do about this? Clearly, mental illness has become a crossroads in South Africa. So firstly, we know that South Africa is a member of the ILO, or International Labour Organization, who's a United Nations agency that brings together governments, employers, employees, and their respective representatives. The ILO has suggested that the workplace has become an appropriate environment for raising awareness and educating employers and their colleagues about mental illness. The constituents of the ILO have created various legal instruments, including conventions, recommendations, which are either binding or not binding on its member states. They have also, the ILO, along with other international organizations, have included many other guidelines in terms of how employers can deal with depressed employees, and this can be done through policies, procedures, or implementing various systems. If we take a closer look at how South Africa has dealt with this, we know that South Africa currently has its own constitution. We know that constitutional rights can permeate all aspects of the work environment and play a very integral role in the relationship between employers and employees. A very important right when it comes to looking at dealing with depressed employees, we can go to section 23(1) of our constitution, which states that everyone has the right to fair labour practice. So what does this mean for employers who are suffering from a mental illness? Well, firstly, it means that people are entitled to be dismissed fairly on both a procedural and a substantial basis. And this means that employers need to follow these guidelines when they are wanting to dismiss or handle a situation with a depressed employee. However, Section 23 of our Constitution is not the only section applicable here, and we know that things like the right to equality and not to be discriminated against unfairly, as well as the dignity of depressed employees, can become and play an integral role in dealing with these matters. If I want to zoom in a bit closer to South Africa's legislative framework, we know that there are currently 2 important acts. Firstly, the Employment Equity Act and the Labour Relations Act. The Employment Equity Act, amongst others, aims to eliminate unfair discrimination in the workplace and sets up certain guidelines for this. This means that a depressed employee has the right not to be unfairly discriminated against based on their illness or disability. We also see the Labour Relations Act, which gives content to Section 23(1) of our Constitution. It looks at the notion of an unfair labour practice, which means that an employer cannot which means that an employee will have certain remedies or protection if they were to experience an unfair labor practice, for example, being dismissed unfairly due to their mental illness. We know that the LRA also contains a Schedule 8, which looks at the Code of Good Practice for dismissal and deals with aspects in relation to capacity, misconduct, or disability when it comes to dealing with these employees. So in conclusion, we can see that depression is very rife in South Africa, along with other mental illnesses. However, it is not something that we have to be at a crossroads about. Just looking at it from one perspective, from a legal perspective, that our law is slowly starting to transform and adapt to the issues that we are facing within the work environment. We see that South Africa does not only have obligations in terms of its international duties coming from the International Labour Organization, but has certain legislative frameworks such as the Labour Relations Act and the Employment Equity Act that employers can go to and find guidelines on how they can deal with employees who may be suffering from a certain mental illness. We can see that mental illness does not have to be a crossroads or a struggle that South Africa is facing and particular employees, but it's something that through legislative obligations and perhaps our moral obligations, we will be able to overcome